The pads are going on at Chicago Bears training camp, and all the biggest roster battles are about to heat up.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. Terms and conditions apply. On the show today, we look at the Bears who are on the roster bubble. As things heat up with the pads coming on at practice, we'll look at the guys whose jobs are at stake and need to have strong training camp and preseason performances if they want to stick around on this 53-man roster, where I think all but one of them have spent their careers up to this point, but their time in Chicago could be on its last legs based on how this training camp practice goes. We'll start with a couple of weapons on offense, then a couple of linemen, and then a couple of developmental players on defense that really need to start cashing in on that development, or else they could be replaced by some outside players the Bears have brought in at this point in the offseason. I think the most prominent names that are in this bubble conversation are Khalil Herbert and Velus Jones Jr., and that's where I want to start. We did a whole podcast episode, was it last week or the week before? I actually don't have the date on it in front of me, about how Khalil Herbert is not on the roster bubble. He's going to be in these conversations, but the whole point of the podcast episode was to explain that the Bears are not going to get to the end of training camp in the preseason and cut Khalil Herbert. He is too valuable to this team to just release at the end of training camp, and I don't think he's going to garner, given that he's in the last year of his rookie contract, it's cheap, but I don't think he's going to garner a big-time draft pick if the Bears were to trade him. Maybe they get a 7th or maybe even a 6th round pick, but I think Khalil Herbert is more valuable to the Chicago Bears, even on the bench, than a 6th round pick. And we're not going to rehash that whole thing because I spent pretty much an entire podcast episode talking about it. But go back and look. It was something along the lines of no, Khalil Herbert is not on the roster bubble entering Chicago Bears training camp. We make the case that he's a better receiver than most people are giving him credit for, and the main obstacle in his way is pass protection, but all the running backs are getting trained a new form of pass protection in this offense. So it becomes a pretty open battle there for those last running back spots. The argument against him is that DeAndre Swift is, of course, the new number 1 running back. Roschon Johnson is rising into that number 2 role potentially this season. And then you've got the veteran Travis Homer on the running back depth chart, who has familiarity with this Seattle Seahawks offensive system from starting his whole career there and having some crossover with the running backs coach Chad Morton and offensive coordinator Shane Waldron. The one thing I would push back on that is there's a reason Seattle didn't bring him back. You know what I mean? He worked with all these coaches and he left for Chicago while all those coaches were still there. So it's not like they made it a huge priority to keep him around. So the relationship is certainly an advantage for him, but not a deciding factor in whether he or Khalil Herbert make the roster, or probably most likely both of them make the roster. Especially because they both also offer upside in the kick return competitions, where Velus Jones' job is very much up for grabs. We've seen Velus Jones make little to no impact on offense, and given what the Bears have at wide receiver right now with with Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Tyler Scott, etc., Velus Jones' path to the 53-man roster this season is not on offense, is not as a receiver in this offense. It is purely as a special teams player. It's going to be kickoff and punt returns, but mostly kickoff returns, because we saw, a couple of seasons ago, he kind of lost punt return duties pretty quickly and didn't get any punt return opportunities last season. They just said, Velus, you're just going to do kickoffs. So that's his primary way to the roster. Winning back into the punt return competition would also certainly help his stock, but the Bears signed some direct kick return competition for him and have guys like Herbert and Homer and others who have done kickoff returning at an effective level previously in their careers. And if they're not going to play as big of roles on offense, Herbert specifically, maybe there's more opportunity for him to get involved again on special teams. Like if we look at the kick return competition here, the Bears signed DeAndre Carter as a free agent who had been once a Chicago Bears, more of a punt returner. They kind of brought him in a couple of seasons ago as an emergency option during the year. But like throughout the course of his career, he's been both a kickoff returner and a punt returner. Last year he was with the Raiders and was, not primary on the kick returns there, but ended up getting some more opportunities. But earlier in his career, he's had kickoff return touchdowns. In 2021, he had 904 kick return yards, averaged 25 yards per kick return. Like he's been an effective kick returner and also offers you more value that he can do both kick and punt returning at a reliable level. If Velus Jones, because that's the thing, it's not just Velus Jones versus DeAndre Carter for the kick return job, but it's like I don't think the Bears are going to keep two players whose only job is special teams. Like DeAndre Carter is not going to be an offensive player for you. You're keeping him only so he can be your return guy. And Velus Jones, again, not going to make a huge impact on offense, so you'd only keep him as a return guy. I don't think they're going to keep two designated return-only type players. Like I guess they kind of did it last year with Trent Taylor, but he did carve out a little bit more of a role on offense, and he was able to be more depth there. Like he wasn't brought in purely to be a return guy the way that DeAndre Carter was. So I find it hard to believe that given all the depth they have at wide receiver, again, Allen, Moore, Odunze, Tyler Scott is 4 for sure. Then is it Jones, Carter, or if you're 5 and 6 receivers then? Like, is that who you end up keeping? The Dante Pettis is going to be in that conversation. Colin Johnson, Simba Webster, Freddie Swain. Like, it's possible you could keep both. But if Carter can do kickoffs and punts, then why bother keeping Velus Jones? Unless Velus Jones is just so much better as a kick returner than Carter is as a kick returner. But Carter's so much better as a punt returner than Jones is as a punt returner. So you got to keep them both because they're both so clearly better in their respective areas of return game. But like Tyler Scott got some kickoff returns last year. Travis Homer's been a kickoff return guy. Khalil Herbert has been a kickoff return guy. So there's a lot of different players that can and will be in the mix for that kickoff return job that Velus Jones has to hold off. And if he cannot, I don't think he is guaranteed any kind of spot on the Bears' 53-man roster, despite being in just his third season as a third-round pick, the 71st overall pick in the draft 2 years ago. If he can't lock down the kickoff return job at a minimum, if not also the punt return job, he's not going to have a spot on this 53-man roster. I don't think there's a scenario where the Bears keep Velus Jones but make him inactive for 18 weeks. Like I just think this is kind of put up or shut up time for him, and they've got a lot of competition to push him in that regard. Same thing at the punt return spot. I don't have an exhaustive list in front of me, but Rome Odunze has been in the punt return conversation. Dante Pettis. There's a lot of different guys that can make some noise in that area, in addition to DeAndre Carter trying to compete with Velus Jones. So it's not stacking up as an easy way there. Tyler Scott, I'm sure, as well, is in the conversation. It's not an easy path for Velus Jones in either spot, but the ball is definitely in his court. He's got nothing but vocal support from special teams coordinator Richard Hightower, who's been trying to sort of hype him up and build him that confidence back up so that he doesn't muff the kicks. And maybe the new kickoff return rules will unlock something more in Velus Jones. But he is certainly sitting on the bubble, whereas I think Khalil Herbert is less so on the bubble. And if either Herbert or Homer can become the top kickoff return guy, which they've been for their teams in the past, that would be their ticket to lock themselves on the 53, but also push Velus Jones off the 53, all in the same process. It's all about the new competition the Bears have brought in for some of these former team draft picks. And that's very true when it comes to some of the offensive line depth. We'll take a look at a couple of Bears draft picks that could be in their last training camp with the team before we turn our attention to the defense, where there's some projects that we've had high hopes for that we still need to see really cash that in and pay off all this time invested in them. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, We're talking about exhaust kits, superchargers, LED headlights, roof racks, and more. So whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. The Bears made it a point, we've heard from Ryan Poles specifically on this, to go out and upgrade their offensive line depth. That they felt the last season and really the last couple of seasons, when guys would get hurt on the offensive line, they weren't necessarily thrilled with the replacements that they had to go to, and maybe more directly, the competition for the replacements that they had to go to. That, it's not that the players they had were bad, but like they want to push them more and really get the best out of those players. But the problem is, a lot of the players that they went to as backups are still here. He's talking about you, Larry Borom. That's one of these players who's definitely on the roster bubble. He certainly is starting from an advantageous position here. And we've talked already on the podcast this week about how I think it's his roster spot to lose right now. If cutdown was today, he's on the 53-man roster. It is not today. It is more than a month away. And that's a lot of time for other offensive linemen to rise up in these competitions and ultimately take Larry Borum's roster spot away. The other backup really any of your backup offensive linemen are more or less on the bubble. None of them, besides like Karana Magaji as a third-round pick as a rookie, he's the only one who's like guaranteed a roster spot at this point, although I don't know what the status of his injury is, but I guess it could be an injured reserve spot at some point if this thing doesn't get better. That doesn't sound like it's going to be the case, but you never know, I suppose. So like any of the backup offensive linemen across the board, Larry Borum, Jatari Carter, Coleman Shelton, Matt Pryor, Jake Curhan, Karana Magaji, not Magaji, but Aviante Collins, Bill Murray. Doug Kramer is the other one who is definitely on the roster bubble in terms of like guys who the Bears drafted and have been working on developing, and now there's some real competition to push them off of the 53. Jatari Carter is too. He's definitely not guaranteed anything, but like 7th-round picks are 7th-round picks, and Doug Kramer's a 6th-round pick. Like neither one of those guys are. You wouldn't be shocked if either one of those guys missed the 53-man roster, but it's pretty wide open with this backup offensive line. They go out and sign Jake Curhan, who has played for the Seattle Seahawks in this offense in the past, has played both guard and tackle in this exact offense. They signed Matt Pryor from the San Francisco 49ers, who has started games at guard and tackle in the NFL. Neither Curhan or Pryor have ever been like a team's plan A starter on the offensive line. They've never gone into a season saying, yep, he's our right tackle or he's our left guard or whatever. But both guys have been called on to fill in as a starter and have performed decently enough. So they're right there with Larry Borum, because Larry Borum has played guard and tackle before. And so it's not like, oh yeah, Larry Borum is for sure screwed because these new guys are in, but it's like, all right, Larry, like they've added a couple of players who have the same type of versatility you do, one of whom has more experience in this offense than you do, but similar amounts of experience in the NFL. Like, beat them out. Show them that you're the incumbent, that you're the one who belongs here, and that you're going to be the top backup offensive lineman on this team. It's not guaranteed anything, but we do know that at training camp practices so far, when Braxton Jones has been held out of precautionary reasons, minor injury stuff, Larry Borum has been the first fill-in off of the bench at left tackle. So Larry Borum is very clearly in the lead among the backup offensive tackles. He is their swing tackle right now. But we do still have a month and change until cutdown day. So if Karan Amagashi comes back fully healthy, does that put him as the top backup left tackle? And then what does that relegate Larry Borum to? Does he kick inside to guard? Could he be your top backup guard, I suppose? Or is he your number 4 offensive tackle? Or would they keep both Karan Amagashi and Larry Borum as backup tackles and then also keep a backup guard and a backup center? Like, are they going to keep 4 backups, so a total of 9 offensive linemen on the 53? Or would they rather keep it at 8 with 1 backup tackle, 1 backup guard, and 1 backup center? I think ideally you don't want to feel like you have to keep 9 offensive linemen. You would like to keep as few offensive linemen as possible while keeping all of your bases covered and making sure that you feel strong about your depth if and when inevitable injuries on the offensive line do happen, especially given the recent track records of Tevin Jenkins and Nate Davis in particular, but now Braxton Jones at training camp and also having some injuries last season. So it's a pretty important decision, right? Like Borum and Doug Kramer and Jatari Carter are not the top of the line household names that you don't see Larry Borum jerseys very much in the stands at Soldier Field. But like he was a 5th round pick. Carter was a 6th round pick. Kramer was a 6th round pick. Carter was a 7th round pick, I believe. Like these were investments that the team has made and has held on to these players for the last 2 or 3 seasons, depending on which one we're talking about here, trying to develop them into quality offensive linemen. At the very least, high-end backups, if not potential starters down the line. And Borum and Carter have been around on the 53-man roster the last couple of seasons. Kramer has been a practice squad guy the last couple of seasons, and I think technically he was on IR spent the last year on IR, but like they were going to put him on the practice squad if he didn't end up landing on IR. They traded for Dan Feeney, et cetera, et cetera. So they put a lot. Not only did they invest draft picks in these players, but they've invested a lot of time and development and snaps in trying to help Larry Borum grow and help Jatari Carter become more consistent and help Doug Kramer land as a center in the NFL. And yet, despite all that, they still go out this offseason and bring in a lot of direct competition for all of them. I mean, it definitely sends a message to Doug Kramer when they sign not one center. They could have just traded for Ryan Bates and said, all right, Bates is the starter, Kramer's the backup, center position is set. We drafted Kramer, we've been developing Kramer, he's ready to be the backup. No, instead they said, no, we'll trade for Bates and sign Coleman Shelton. So Kramer is instantly then the 3rd string center. And if those guys are competing to start, and Kramer is not competing to start, then that clearly tells you where Kramer is on that hierarchy, and you're not going to keep 3 centers on your 53-man roster. So I think this is at best another practice squad year for Doug Kramer, and how many years of practice squad do you keep giving him before you say, all right, like it was a pleasure, but you just never took that next step to be even our top backup center. Doesn't have the positional versatility to play, at least up to this point, hasn't really played much guard either. So he's kind of limited here, and the Bears haven't been very willing to give him bigger opportunities, likely based on what they've seen from him so far. Carter and Borum, on the other hand, were top backups last season. I think there is a certain amount of faith in them, but also a feeling of like, hey, let's get some other veterans in here to push them. New offensive system anyway. Everyone's going to be learning and catching up. One of these veterans has familiarity that helps too. And, it's not like Matt Pryor or Jake Curhan is just some stud backup offensive lineman that it should really be starting somewhere because he's so good and the Bears got to steal by landing him. No, I mean, they've been all right backups. Like, sure, they're solid, and I like having that competition. And I think in all likelihood, Borum's going to win out, and Carter's probably going to win out, and then Shelton's probably going to be backup center, and then they're probably going to keep 9 and go Amagaji, Carter, Borum, and Shelton as your 4 backups. But I think Larry Borum's the one who's even in the more precarious spot just because of the draft pick of Amagaji. But Amagaji can also play guard. So if the Bears sit there and feel like, man, we're really confident in Larry Borum playing either offensive tackle spot, and really we want to groom Amagaji into the next right guard to replace Nate Davis next season, then it could be Carter who ends up getting the axe there. If they just say, we're going to make Amagaji our backup guard, we're going to make Borum our backup tackle, and we're going to make Shelton our backup center, then it's Carter who you say, sorry, we appreciate your service and we'll try and get you back on the practice squad and keep you on our Rolodex there. But otherwise, either of those guys are definitely in jeopardy. Speaking of player development with this, I think the same thing is true for a couple of guys that have been around on defense for a few seasons now, but haven't really taken that step forward to be, a real must retain player at their respective positions. And there's a bunch of new competition, veterans brought in from outside the organization coming for their roster spot. We'll look at one of the defensive linemen in particular and one of the defensive backs in particular next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality candidates that are right for the role, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because they have all the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. I'm on LinkedIn. I bet you're likely on LinkedIn, and if you're not, a lot of your friends, family members, and coworkers are all a part of LinkedIn, and that's what makes it the best place to look for candidates. Because LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you find professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So you can hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Just like the Bears have invested 2 or 3 seasons in trying to develop some of these offensive linemen, the same thing is true for a couple of late round picks on defense, where they've been around, they've been on the 53-man roster, and they've gotten some playing time. But in that playing time, we haven't really seen them pay off. We haven't really seen them go, oh, there it is. That's why they used that. That's why they took a chance on him in the late rounds of the draft. That's what we've been looking for out of his development. We just haven't seen it yet with Dominique Robinson on the defensive line and Elijah Hicks at safety. And I think both spots have some intriguing veteran competition pushing them for their 53-man roster spot, and also a draft pick at Dominique Robinson's position. One thing in Robinson's favor at this point, besides being an incumbent who's been in this defense compared to some of the free agents they brought in this offseason, is that he's one of the players they've been experimenting with kicking inside to some defensive tackle reps on passing situations so far at training camp. And if he can really excel there, I was going to say excel and succeed, and it came out as exceed. If he can succeed there and show that he's got that versatility, that's certainly a leg up on some of the other guys, even like rookie Austin Booker, who they're not going to have do that. I mean, he's not going to take Booker's spot, but I think Dominique Robinson is in a very similar spot as Larry Borum, right? Where not only did they bring in veterans on the defensive end position, mostly Jake Martin from the Indianapolis Colts this past season, but the Texans before that. They also got Khalid Kareem last season. So not only is there a veteran brought in directly for his spot, but then the Bears also drafted a player at his spot. And just like with offensive tackle, where it's like, do they keep both the incumbent and the rookie? They're not going to get rid of the rookie, so is there room for both of them on there? Like Montez Sweat, DeMarcus Walker, Austin Booker, guaranteed roster spots. Jake Martin as a free agent from the Colts/Texans, not guaranteed a roster spot, but I think he's got the strongest case to be, one of these 4 top defensive ends. So that puts Dominique Robinson 5th. Are the Bears going to keep 5 defensive ends, or can Dominique Robinson show the team that he's better than Jake Martin? That, hey, you shouldn't have brought in, or you didn't need to bring in this outside free agent veteran who's started a full season he was a starter for the Texans. So he's like seen a lot and been around the block here. I can be better than him. I'm the freak physical athlete that you drafted and are trying to mold into a great pass rusher. But we've seen Robinson with 2 career sacks in 2 seasons and was a healthy scratch quite a bit last season. For a 5th round pick, you had higher hopes for Robinson. Most 5th round picks don't pan out into anything, but he was drafted as a raw developmental defensive end prospect or edge rusher. They might have been, no, they were still a 4-3 defense at that point. So yeah, defensive end prospect. We knew Dominique Robinson was going to take time, was going to need to rebuild a lot of his mechanics and get stronger and bigger and all these things. So we didn't expect that he was going to come in year 1 and be great. We didn't even necessarily expect he was going to come into year 2 and be great, but we certainly thought he would be better in 2023 than what he had been in 2022. And so it felt more like a step back than a step forward for a player who seemed like he only had room to go up, but found room to at least kind of stay stagnant. So he needs to absolutely make a big leap forward, or else Jake Martin's taking his job and Austin Booker's taking his job, and he will be elsewhere in 2024 on this roster, but they're giving him every opportunity to do so. He's rotating in with the starters sometimes at practice, so that's a good start for him. But if I had to bet today, I would think he's not on your 53-man roster come week 1 against the Tennessee Titans. A little bit different at the safety position with Elijah Hicks, where Hicks has started games in place of Eddie Jackson due to injury. He's got some experience in this defense. I didn't think he was particularly good in those spot starts, but like he's done it before and wasn't terrible. I mean, made some mistakes, but wasn't like totally abysmal, I suppose. So like he definitely is someone who most 53-man roster projections are penciling him in as the backup free safety behind Kevin Byard. But the Bears are running their safety position a little bit different this season, and it's not so much free safety versus strong safety. It's more left safety and right safety. The roles for Byard and Brisker aren't going to be as different as they were for Jackson and Brisker. And so like Elijah Hicks is built more in the Eddie Jackson type mold of a rangy free safety who's not very physical and not a super consistent tackler in that regard. And one of the names the Bears brought in this offseason that hasn't really gotten much attention is a backup safety by the name of Tarvarius Moore. And I just think he's a name we should keep an eye on given some of his experience in the NFL. I think we mentioned him at one point in this process, but he's a sleeper dark horse to beat out Elijah Hicks and make the 53-man roster as one of the likely two backup safeties, or they could end up keeping 5 total safeties. But I think Tarvarius Moore is one of these names that sneakily we should get to know just a little bit better here because he's going to push a former draft pick who started games for this team in Elijah Hicks. If you look back over Tarvarius Moore's career, sat out all of last season. I think he was with the Packers actually in the preseason, ended on injured reserve, and that was his whole year. Year before that, 2022 with the 49ers, he was a backup and kind of a special teams player. Year before that with the 49ers, had torn his Achilles. So in the last 3 seasons, he's played 13 games. There's a reason why he was available as a veteran minimum on the street and didn't really get much attention or fanfare when he was signed. But you go back to 2020 with the San Francisco 49ers, and he started 8 games for them, played in the Super Bowl, and intercepted Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. The Bears have a safety on the bench who intercepted Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. I would think, obviously, like that's one play, and it's not necessarily indicative of how good he is on the whole, but like he's clearly capable of playing in the Super Bowl on a San Francisco 49ers defense that is not short on talent. And so I would think a guy who started games on really good San Francisco 49ers defenses would have a decent shot at the very least, if he can stay healthy, to be your backup safety, right? And we're not talking about him being a surprise starter or something. It's not like a safety competition there, but like, I think that guy could, dare I say should, be talented enough to beat someone like Elijah Hicks, who's a 7th-round pick who's been around, but like, we haven't seen Elijah Hicks look like a guy who you're like, oh, there's a future starter, right? There's a reason why when the Bears cut Eddie Jackson this offseason, no one said, Elijah Hicks is going to start at safety. They're just going to move on to the succession plan. Like the Bears don't have a safety succession plan after Kevin Byard. Like Hicks has just not shown us to be someone who you're confident enough in to truly take over as a starter. And as a 7th-round pick, despite his experience in this defense, like he's not guaranteed much of anything in terms of a 53-man roster spot. And if Tarvarius Moore can stay healthy and get back to some of that level of play we saw early in his career, which maybe the injuries have just been too much and he just has lost something athletically and can't get back there. But he's one of those guys I'm going to be watching extra closely in preseason games and at training camp practices to see if he makes a little bit more noise than we might have expected on the front end. So those to me are kind of the 6 main Bears in this bubble conversation of guys who have been around on the roster before, or certainly these were all draft picks by Ryan Poles. They might not be able to make the team this year based on some of the additions the team has made in free agency and elsewhere. I'd love to know if there's any other players on the bubble that you identify. Let us know here in the comments on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, or you can tweet us at Locked On Bears or post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group. However you do it, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. I hope you'll come back on Monday and make us your first listen again as we come back with Bears training camp updates now that the pads are coming on. And you can be sure, no matter what happens at training camp, we're going to give you another opportunity to bear down.